Kia ora and welcome to the Trends Property Inside series. I'm your host, Andrew Johnson, and today we're talking about something crucial to every Kiwi family, the legal structures that protect your wealth, your business and your future. Joining me is Shenali Lewke-Bandara, Associate at Denham Bramwell Lawyers, to explain how to set up smart legal structures, avoid common pitfalls, and ultimately protect what matters most to you and your family. Shenali, thank you very much for taking some time to sit down and be on the show with me today.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Hey, now, I know it's not something that's in your wheelhouse to sit down and discuss and talk about what you do every day, but certainly some of the legal intricacies are, in my world as a human adult, we're not sort of laid out the law, talked about these kind of things. So I'm keen to sort of find out some stuff that some of our audience might find interesting when it's coming to look after their trusts and their property assets and their family bits and pieces. Now, you specialise in that particular area. So what got you into that part of law?
Well, law was an accident for me entirely. When I was at school, I didn't really know what I wanted to study, but my history teacher said, maybe you might want to try law. And I did the degree, and halfway through it, I sort of hated it, to be honest. And and I thought I probably wouldn't practice at all. But then when I finished my degree, I started working with law clerking for a family law barrister. And that was really eye-opening because at law school, I always thought that the only pathways were down commercial routes and working with companies and that sort of thing. But this was really quite different because you're working with families, you're getting to know people's stories and just helping them through that. And I think that's what I really enjoyed about this space because it's really people-driven.
And so was that hard as a young person, a young lawyer, to kind of be working on that emotional level with some of the family situations you must have been involved in?
On some level, yes, because, people are obviously coming to you at a very stressful point in their lives. It's obviously the biggest change that's happening for them. Often if you're coming out of a long relationship that's ending, it's big things to think about in terms of, what happens with the kids and the money aspect as well, because you're used to having two incomes and now that's suddenly gone to one. That's a big change.
Yes. Yeah. So I suppose that's part of what I want to chat to you about today because life happens, right? Yeah. And so it's all about sort of being as prepared as possible. So you went on then to come and work at Denham Bramwell. So tell me a little bit about that law firm and what you guys specialise in there.
Yeah, so Denham Bramwell, we're a mid-size law firm. We have 3 offices in Auckland, one in Manukau, Whangaparo, and one in Albany. And so we have a number of different teams, so civil litigation, trust estates, wills, family and property. And it works really well because we're all just specialists in our own space. And I think in the work that we do, particularly in my area, there's a lot of aspects that are quite interdisciplinary. You don't just have one person come in and go, oh yes, it's absolutely a family issue. It'll tie over into something in the trust space or something in the property space, or sometimes there's tax elements as well, and that's when we work with other professionals too. So there's an overall very collaborative sort of way that we approach things in the firm, and that's really good because you get a holistic view for the client. Yeah,
that must be really important, almost like a coordination service between the different divisions.
Absolutely, because you don't want to sort of go in tunnel focused on something and then just miss other aspects as well.
So how do you do that? So coming from the start of a journey when you meet someone for the first time, how do you get in a position where you can learn about what they really need? Because I'd imagine sometimes people don't know actually what they need. They've sort of just got the situation. So how do you, when you meet people for the first time, sort of start that process?
Well, often it's a big step back kind of conversation of, what are your objectives? What are you actually wanting to achieve? Because I work in the trust space a lot, and I think New Zealand is very, very popular for having a lot of trust. We've got the most trust per capita, and we're coming out of an era where just about everyone in their neighbour had a trust, and they don't really know why they set them up.
Yeah, why is that?
I think a lot of it is policy driven, and historically, we've had people wanted to avoid death duties and they wanted to avoid inheritance taxes. So that's all of the trust that we're seeing sort of created in historically in the 90s and early 2000s. But nowadays, I think with the changes in the trust space in particular, we're really sort of wanting to understand from clients what is it that you're actually wanting to achieve? Because often people will say, well, I just want protection, but it's a case of drilling it down further. So what are you actually concerned about? Is it that you're in business and you're wanting that kind of creditor protection? Or is it to hold, your separate property assets? Or is it the idea that this is supposed to hold intergenerational wealth, so really finding out from the client, because that way we can provide a more tailored sort of solution, because I think sometimes if you try and protect everything, you end up not doing a whole lot and protecting a lot.
Because coming to see a lawyer, even just thinking about that whole process, for some people can be quite intimidating.
Oh,
so
absolutely.
What would you say to people who are thinking, is it time to reach out? Should I reach out? What do I need to know? Because you're saying that people might come in with a preconception about what they need, but should they worry about the process because it's as scary as they maybe think it is?
Well, I think often just come in and have a chat, really, because we sort of deal with these situations on a day-to-day basis. So we'd be able to sort of understand what your objectives are and then help sort of work through some aspects, maybe give you options. And I think a lot of what we do and what our job is really is about reality testing and asking some of those really uncomfortable questions as well. So you don't have to come in perfectly with, this is exactly what I'm going to do and this is how I'm going to do it. If you've had those conversations before, then that's great. But it doesn't by any means mean that you have to have absolutely everything planned before you even walk in the door.
And a lawyer, a little bit like your hairdresser or your doctor, it's quite a personal relationship you're going to build there. And so for people who don't have a lawyer and they were going to reach out to one, how do they figure out who they should talk to or what they'd be looking for?
I think when you're looking for your lawyer, particularly for your personal kind of matters, it's important that you obviously find someone that you can build a rapport with, and you want to be able to share all of the aspects that are going on.
Because you've got to share it all, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, often I think, because I came out of a litigation space, and I find that when you're working with people in litigation, they'll tell you everything. They'll often tell you everything hoping that something will be a silver bullet.
Right.
But when you're working in a transactional space, which is more, helping people build structures for their next steps, they are often quite mindful about what they tell you, and they think, oh, that's not necessary. But my preference is just tell me all of it. If you've got one child that you're a little bit concerned about, let me know that. Or if there is some addiction issues, I'd like to know that too, because, we can't put structures in place and help you protect if we don't really know what the objectives are.
Right.
Yeah.
So I suppose for some people it can be quite confronting to come and have a chat to a lawyer because they're going to have these kind of authentic conversations. And so how do you sort of navigate that personally?
Yeah, it is. So I think the most important thing is that they feel comfortable enough to sort of share the things that are going on in terms of their family dynamic. A lot of it is thinking in the future and often thinking about scenarios that you don't often want to turn your mind to. Like, for example, if you pass away and your partner re-partners and they move into your home, is that something you're comfortable with? And sort of especially when we're talking about a blended family situation, there's all sorts of different layers that come in. And it's quite important to have those discussions. It's by no means an expectation that you have the answer straight away. Often it's quite usual when we do some estate planning that I have these questions that I talk to clients about. They go away, they think about it, maybe they talk to their partner about it as well.
Yeah.
And then they come back and look, at the end of the day, our job is just to make sure that we highlight as many risks as possible, but you might sit and think about it and say, actually, that's not something we're too concerned about, but that's a real pressure point for us. And we just craft something based on that.
Do you find after the initial meeting, you've given almost the person or people a bit of liberty to go away and have those conversations, because there is the knowledge of what I know about my life, and then, as you say, talking about scenarios, well, what will happen when this happens? You think, oh, we've never actually discussed what would happen if I die and my partner still lives in the house, and as you say, has someone come and live in it.
Yeah.
So do you find that when they come back a second time, you've almost given them an excuse to have those conversations that maybe they should have had already?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I always say with some of those things, you can throw us under the bus. And
Shenali said.
Yeah, my lawyer says,
Yeah.
But it's really important to have those conversations, and because it follows through into all of the estate planning. I think some of the biggest mistakes that I think people make is potentially assuming that everybody's on the same page.
The assumptions is a big thing, right?
Yeah, and I think that probably comes from, if you think about it in a relationship sort of property context, where people are early on in that relationship, often money is quite an uncomfortable thing to talk about.
Yes.
And so it's not surprising that, when you first start working with people, they don't even know how much their partner earns, So, and that's quite crucial, if you're thinking about estate planning with somebody, to know things like that.
Yeah, hidden bank accounts and things that come up that you didn't think to ask about. I always find it fascinating as an adult that we never really sat down at one particular point, age 18, whenever it is, and said, right, here's the law of New Zealand, everything you need to know. This is what happens if you break those laws. And as you go into the quite, stressful time of property purchasing and selling and all that kind of journey people are on, sometimes people will say, so have you got this or have you done that? And you can kind of feel a little bit like stupid. And if your day-to-day life, you want to feel confident about your capabilities and what you are. So as people are coming into adulthood and they're forming these relationships and moving into spaces of having assets, ones they may have from their family, intergenerational stuff, versus also then acquiring new ones, what are some of the milestones that people should be aware of as we move through life where it is really important to actually take the time to reach out before you're going to kind of need the results of the work you do? But what are some of the key milestones we go through as adults where we should really start talking to a lawyer?
Yeah, I think so the way our law works is after the 3 years, 3 years is the magical number, that there is a presumption of equal sharing. But ideally, you want to start having those conversations well before that. And as soon as, you're probably comfortable enough in that relationship and know that it's something that you're probably going to...
and when you say 3 years... when is it? Is it date number 10? Is it when we moved in together?
Yeah.
How does the law sort of say we are officially in a relationship?
Well, that's tricky too, because there are a number of factors that they look at in terms of defining that relationship. It might be, whether people perceive you as a couple, whether you've got joint bank accounts, whether you're living together, all of those sorts of things. And so it's variable as well. So that's another really important aspect of having a contracting out agreement, because it's agreeing on some of those facts early on, which can come up for debate later.
Yes, absolutely.
And that starting point of a relationship can be quite crucial too.
Because it's not always just your anniversary date, because that was our first date and things like that.
No.
It's kind of important to maybe have a conversation. Hey, when do we think that our relationship actually started? Was it a year and a half ago now? And be open about that.
And often when you're drafting a contracting out agreement, you'll say this is when it started. And so it's a very black and white thing of, okay, this is when the relationship actually commenced. This is actually going a little bit off topic, but there was actually one really interesting case that went all the way to the Supreme Court. It's called Sutton Bell. And that was interesting for all sorts of reasons. But one key thing was there was a house that was transferred into a trust, but the transfer actually happened before the relationship commenced. But the start date of the relationship was such an issue. They went to the High Court trying to figure out that start date. And it's so factual. You're talking about a relationship that started maybe, 15 years ago, but you're trying to find emails, trying to find pictures and everything to try and pinpoint a date. So it's often a little thing like that, but it can have quite big flow-on effects.
Yeah, because some of us come into a relationship with different assets. Either like our families might have trust that we're connected to. So how do you have those conversations around what have you got, what have I got? Is there an appropriate time to start to have those conversations?
I'd always say start earlier, because the reason is because that 3-year mark is so critical. Often if you go past the 3-year mark, you've got to think from sort of if you've got an advantage party or a disadvantage party, to use those terms, from that person's perspective, there's not really an incentive to sign anything beyond the 3-year mark, because you've already sort of acquired those entitlements. So why would you then go back and sign something else?
Okay, that's awkward.
Yeah, it is.
I love you, but what do we do there?
Yeah. So I think the better way to kind of approach it might be from a perspective of just wanting clarity for both parties, because what a contracting out agreement can do is it just sets out everybody's expectations. If the relationship were to end either because of a separation or also because of a death as well. And I think that's what people often forget, is that the Relationship Property Act will be relevant in death as well. And so you've got to work through all sorts of circumstances around, what are our expectations? For example, we might be going 50-50 on everything, but if there's a child and one person has to take time off of work, what are our contributions going to be like then?
Yeah, it's such a minefield of the trusts and the wills and the contracting out agreement. So maybe let's explore that then. So if we talk about trusts, because you say they're so prevalent in New Zealand, how does it happen if I want to put together a new trust, if I'm already connected to a trust, we want to set up a trust for us together? Are there pros and cons for the protections that trust, does it complicate things or does it make life simpler?
It really depends on what your objective is. And I think with trusts, they can be great tools, but I think most common misconception that there is around them is the fact that people don't really have a great understanding of them. I think historically, because they've been so prevalent, people almost use them as an extension of their own personal bank account.
Right.
And that's when you sort of run into issues, because there needs to be some kind of separation between you as a person that settled the trust, the trustees that manage the assets, and the beneficiaries themselves. But if you are all that one person, it doesn't really provide that protection.
Right.
And so the complicating factor for relationship property aspects is when trusts have been poorly managed in the past, as we've seen time and time again. And then in the end, when the relationship ends, people want to say, well, actually it's all in a trust, so it can't be touched. But I think that's probably one of the biggest misconceptions. A trust is not going to be a catch-all shield.
Yes.
It really depends on how it's been managed.
And of course, if I'm the recipient or beneficiary of a trust and I received, money or assets from that trust, obviously having my relationship property sorted before I inherit that or that comes into play is super important as well. Because I would put that into my own trust. How does that kind of work in terms of if I'm given assets from one trust to another, or how do I get that set up correctly?
So if we're talking about an inheritance type context, it's really important that you have sort of a separate place to keep that asset if you don't want it to be mixed in with your relationship. But also, if you don't already, that might be another time when you might consider broaching the subject of a contracting out agreement with your partner, because you might have built everything together up until this point, but then you might then suddenly get this large amount of money, and you might think, well, actually, it would be quite good to pay down the mortgage, which is, of course, a joint asset.
Then it becomes joint property, yeah.
So you might want to carve that particular asset out, in which case it might be a good time to potentially start talking about it, but it would have to be some kind of a limited agreement anyway.
And so you said before with contracting out agreements, or people might call them like a prenup, as sort of a colloquial way of describing it. But as you're alluding to, it's actually not just about contemplation of marriage and then, that happening and so forth. Things happen before you actually get legally married. So when you talk about things around like separate property and joint property, is there a clear way to delineate, hey, this is what my asset is, this is what I'm bringing into the relationship, and then say if I spent some money on something, therefore it makes it become shared property, that, that's what the contracting out agreement would help delineate and define?
Yeah, that's one of the key things that we do when we do draft a contracting out agreement is we get an understanding of people's assets and also their liabilities as well, and try to delineate what is what they've brought in and what is what they consider to be joint and what they consider to be separate. The debts are also an interesting one as well, because I think people often sort of forget about that, but think about things like student loan debts. If you've got there are some careers where people are known to have larger debts, like pilots, for example, and that's
lawyers.
Lawyers, yes. You might want that to be considered separate, for example, but it depends on how the agreement is drafted overall.
Right. And so for people then looking at how these things sort of interplay with their wills, right? So there has been conversations in the past, and you hear it in different communication channels, that, hey, you can kind of draft your own will at home and put it together and it'll all be fine. Wills are something that often are affecting the life of someone possibly not around anymore. And so how do you navigate that? Because it's a little bit awkward about saying, you want me to write something about how, when I die, what happens. So what should people consider when they actually put their will together, and certainly doing it through a professional, but what is most important to you when you're trying to get people to get their wills sorted?
I think the most important thing is you have one, because generally, if you have assets over $15,000, then you don't have a will, then there's a separate process for dealing with that. And most people, if you think about it, if they have a KiwiSaver, would likely have over $15,000. The other thing in terms of DIY wills, or like doing it yourself, the things I would be really cautious about is I often find that people don't actually understand the intricacies and the complexities, I suppose, of their own lives. Like, gone are the days, I think, where you've got mum, dad, and 2 kids. We're often talking about blended families. We're talking about people partnering later in life, so they bring in more assets as well. And there's also, I think, another emotional aspect of will drafting that I think is quite important to consider as well, particularly where there is that blended family, because what we've found, which is quite interesting, is the things that you can't ever prevent, I suppose, people from challenging your will or having an argy-bargy at the end. But what you can do is sort of try to mitigate as much as possible. And we do find that sometimes it's little things like the sentimental items, like who gets the heirlooms or what happens to the ashes, that can be an issue as well. Right. So just thinking about those sorts of aspects.
So it pays to be really specific.
Well, you don't necessarily have to have a complete outline in your will, but at least if you've got ideas about certain things like that, or with things like family items that you want to go to a certain person, you might consider whether you might make those gifts during your lifetime as well. So
Right.
those are things as well.
And when you talk about contesting wills, because we do hear about this from time to time, why would someone contest, or where are there loopholes or gaps? And I've put my will together, I've said what I want to have happen. Why would anybody be able to argue with what I said should happen with my stuff?
Yeah, and I think that's often a common misconception as well, because I think one of our biggest roles is probably explaining to people that yes, it is your will, but you've also got moral obligations to certain people, and often your biggest moral obligation is to your spouse and then to your children. So a common example where people might, for example, challenge a will is, particularly in a blended family situation, we often see, if you've got a house, you might give the surviving spouse the ability to live in the house for the rest of their life. And then after that's gone, you preserve the capital and it's going to go to your children. But sometimes where that can fall apart is if there's an expectation that your spouse has to maintain that property and they have to pay rates and insurance. But what if they don't have the money to be able to do that? Then it's sort of a meaningless...
Right, so can't work.
Yeah, it won't work. And so you've got to really think about the practicalities of what it is that you're drafting, whether that person will actually be able to maintain that, and also just providing certainty as well, also for your children as well.
Mm-hmm. I mean, some people often hear them say, we'll just get married before we purchase a property and it'll make life easier. But obviously that's not really the case, right? Because just because you're married is not going to simplify the fact, we now own a house together 50-50 because we're married, because of some of these things to do with trusts and wills, right?
Absolutely. And it just depends on the family dynamic as well.
Do you have any particular examples of where you just wish people hadn't, they've connected their kids to parents' stuff and they've tried to play the system's thinking around getting, financing or bank stuff, and it's just become incredibly complicated because they think they can cheat the system as opposed to just doing things the right way from the start?
I think that's probably one of those points where it's really, really important to take a holistic view of things. And that means not just working with your lawyer, but also we often loop in with like the accountants or the financial planners and that sort of thing, because sometimes what can be really, really good from like a tax perspective can be really detrimental from a legal or a relationship property perspective. I mean, there's one example that comes to mind. It's a case called Preston that sort of went all the way to the Supreme Court, but in that case he appointed his wife as a beneficiary simply because the accountant said that would be great for tax purposes. But when they separated after 5 years, she had a claim against that trust, even though that trust was settled prior to the relationship. So it's just being really mindful of just the flow-on effects and taking a big picture view of it. And I think that's also a really important thing, that you loop all your professionals in together, because we can't work in vacuums.
Yeah, because some people would take the advice from the accountant, which may be correct to some degree, but
from the accountant,
from their perspective, right?
Yeah.
So you'll often do that where you work with other people's accountants to make sure any changes being made are correct.
And it's quite common, especially when we're working with people who have got family businesses, for example, where the estate planning is not that clear cut, to actually loop the accountant in through all of the meetings as well, because they have the numbers, they know where everything sits. So it makes sense.
So with all these things in mind, and from your experience, are there just the common mistakes? If you could call out to the people listening and watching and just say, look, there's some common things, just 101, make sure you look after these elements of what you're doing, or come and talk to the lawyer. These are the things you should ultimately take care of as a baseline foundation before we get into the other kind of complicated areas that are just simple human protection for myself, for my family, my kids. Are there some basic things I should do where you see common mistakes happening often?
Definitely, I think a will is one of the things that everybody should have in place. And like I said, it's not sort of the basic document that you write on the back of a napkin. It's kind of a bit more, it's more involved. So, and it's really important that you have one that's well drafted, that takes into account your family's circumstances, but also your assets as well. That's one thing that we really do run through with people when they do look to prepare their wills, is actually understanding where their assets are and what the ownership is. Because say for example, where people own a house together, depending on that ownership of the house, it might not even fall into their estate if it's owned jointly with your partner. It might just go directly to them, and it won't go form part of your estate and be divided or be given to your children. So it's really important to understand all of those aspects. The other document that I think is really, really key is enduring powers of attorney.
Right.
Yeah.
So we hear that, Sean, it's like EOP? EPOA, yes.
So what they are, they're documents that come into play if you lose capacity, either because of a health event or some kind of accident. I always say they're kind of documents that you put in place and you hope you never need.
Yes.
But they're always very, very helpful to have.
And what does that do? It gives instructions about who can make decisions about my well-being, my health, turning off the life support kind of stuff. Is that what is going down the line?
It's sort of, about your health and well-being for the welfare one. And for the property one, it's about making financial decisions on your behalf. So say, for example, if you had a situation where you were needing some care and but you've lost capacity, that EPOA will be quite important, because if that house needed to be sold, for example, to help pay for care, you wouldn't be able to do it because you've got no one to sign on behalf of the incapacitated person. So that's when your EPOAs will really, really be crucial there.
And looking at property purchases and the whole process of selling and buying houses and that journey, and people often think of, hey, I'm going to open homes, we're looking for something we like, we might put an offer in and so forth, and then, we need to talk to the lawyers. Would you wish people come to you a bit earlier in the process?
I think with everything in general, it's nicer to have a heads up and be involved in that decision making, because we can sort of steer you in different directions, or ask you questions that you perhaps hadn't turned your mind to.
And so if people want to reach out to Denham Bramwell and find out what you guys do and use the coordinated services, what's the best way they can get in touch with you guys?
Probably our website is the best. So it's denhambramwell.co.nz. And on there you'll find all of our profiles and our information, and you can give us a call, you can send us an email. So
the advice still is reach out early, have a chat, don't be scared, no stupid questions.
No stupid questions, come and talk to us, and we'll work through it. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you taking some time out of your busy day dealing with all these empathetic and crazy legal situations you are going through to sit down and have a chat with me. So thanks very much.
Thank you for having me.
And thanks to you for spending some time with us. Don't forget you can find all our episodes on our platform by visiting trendsproperty.com. Here you can browse ideas and inspiration, products, people and places offering solutions for you on your property journey. Remember, you can sign up and join the Trends Property community where you can connect, collect and collaborate with others, or take advantage of our educational guides to help you take the right steps in the right direction. As always, thanks for listening. We hope to see you next time on the Trends Property Insight series, where we can help you find your place, your way. Ka kite. Goodbye.